Raises are frozen. No exceptions. That line split the damn air like a thundercrack through drywall. Brian said it like he was announcing the weather, arms folded, tie too tight, that smug tilt of his jaw that made him look like every 90s movie villain who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room just because he wears cologne that smells like inherited debt. I was mid-sip, black coffee, no sugar, because someone around here has to stay awake while the numbers cook themselves, and I just froze. My hand hovered near my mouth. The mug didn't shake, not visibly, but my pulse sure as hell did. This was the quarterly meeting. The one where you usually hear fake congratulations, recycled buzzwords, and the occasional awkward applause for a team synergy win that was really just Janice in procurement staying late while everyone else played Minesweeper on their phones. But this, universal raise freeze, with no heads up, no context, no discussion, and right after I'd saved the company $1.2 million on that leaseback project, Brian didn't even glance at me when he said it. That told me everything. The room didn't explode. It didn't need to. Silence hit harder. You could hear the click of laptop lids closing. Someone's pen stopped moving mid-scribble. The intern from Strategy, Jake, I think, looked at me like I'd been slapped, like I was supposed to say something. But I didn't, because you don't speak when the trap's still setting. I've been at Delmont Financial 10 years, long enough to know when a bullet's got your name on it, and when it's meant to ricochet off you and hit someone else. Brian wanted a reaction. Hell, he expected one. He thought I'd sputter, maybe protest, remind the room what I did for the bottom line last quarter. He was dying for public outbursts so he could paint me as emotional, entitled, disruptive. Something that rhymed with too expensive, but I didn't flinch. I sipped my coffee again, let the bitterness wash the taste of betrayal off my tongue, and just watched. Let the others shift in their chairs. Let them glance at me, waiting for some cue. Let Brian stand there with his cheap power stance, thinking he'd just played me like a violin when he'd really just plucked a single sour string. When the meeting ended abruptly with no Q&A, no discussion, just a mumbled thanks team, I gathered my things slowly, methodically. Notebook, pen, charger. My chair didn't scrape. My heels didn't click. I moved like I had nowhere urgent to be, like someone who just found out the building was on fire but had time to finish her sandwich first. As I walked past Brian, he made eye contact. Briefly, flicker of smug satisfaction behind his eyes, like a cat who thinks he's caught the bird. I gave him nothing, not a nod, not a smile, not a twitch, because I knew something he didn't. I knew he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade he didn't understand. I knew the timing, I knew the paperwork, and more importantly, I knew what email I'd sent at 8:47 a.m. that morning. The one he hadn't read. The one with insurance clause review urgent in the subject line. The one BCC'd to legal, but we'll get to that. Right now, all I needed was to go back to my desk, sort through a few folders. Maybe reread a clause or two, because if Brian wanted to play freeze tag with salaries, he should have made damn sure he wasn't touching a live wire in the dark. And I don't scream when I'm burning. I just raise the temperature until someone else catches fire. 3 weeks before that meeting, before the word freeze dropped out of Brian's mouth like spoiled chicken from a fridge shelf, I was sitting across from him in conference room C, the one with the flickering light nobody ever fixed, and a view of the alley where the delivery guy always parked sideways. He had his sleeves rolled up like he was auditioning for a TED talk, trying to look collaborative, but his tone had the same sugar-coated command I'd come to expect from middle management men who didn't understand what fiduciary risk meant but loved tossing the word optimization around like confetti. Look, he said, clicking his pen like a nervous tick, I just need you to be a bit more flexible with the leaseback numbers. You know, show a little initiative, get creative, that word again. The spreadsheet was pulled up between us. Column after column of projected savings, amortizations, capex deferrals. I'd spent days on it, tight, conservative estimates based on real conditions. I even factored in the facility's aging HVAC system, which, funny enough, hadn't been inspected in 2 years. I should know. I'd flagged it twice. You want me to massage the numbers, I said flatly, no smile. Brian gave a little chuckle, the kind frat boys give when you call them out at the bar. It's not massaging. It's aligning with the narrative. The narrative that says we'll save $3.2 next quarter by pretending this building isn't one rusted pipe away from a lawsuit. His smile didn't fade, just calcified into that glassy salesman look. Rachel, you're overthinking. Just round the projections a little. We'll sort out the real numbers after the board signs off. I leaned back. You're asking me to falsify projected financial data to front-load executive approval, then fix it later and hope no one's paying attention. He rolled his eyes. God, no. Just don't put it in writing, okay? That's when I knew. You don't say don't put it in writing unless you already know it's wrong. Unless you've done it before and it worked. Unless you think the woman across from you has enough career fatigue to go along with it because, hey, she's been here a decade and probably wants to keep her parking spot. So I nodded. Slow. I even let my tone soften. Sure, Brian, I'll take another pass at the model. That was Friday afternoon. By 8:47 a.m. Monday, the email was in his inbox. Subject line, insurance clause review urgent. It was short. 4 paragraphs, plain language, no accusatory tone. Just a tidy little summary of how altering leaseback savings projections without internal clause review might violate the material misrepresentation section of our Fidelity Rider. I even highlighted the relevant passage and cited the page number, because I'm courteous like that. And yes, I BCC'd legal, not because I expected them to do anything. Legal at Delmont has the spine of a worm on a hot sidewalk, but it was enough. Enough to timestamp concern. Enough to say, I told you before the damage. Enough to make sure if this thing went sideways, I wouldn't be the one in the spotlight when the CFO played dumb and HR tried to rewrite history. And then, I waited. I went to meetings. I ran financials. I signed off on minor reports and denied a vendor contract with a clause that smelled like skunked wine. I smiled at Brian in the hallway and let him think I'd folded. But every time I opened that email folder, titled Brian Risk Do Not Delete, I smiled a little harder. Because Brian didn't read my email. I know this because he replied to it with thanks, we'll review, and then tried to loop me into a calendar invite to finalize the projections. There was no mention of the clause, no mention of risk exposure. Just a follow-up meeting with the head of ops and that fake-friendly subject line, moving forward together. That invite stayed unopened in my inbox like a coffin someone forgot to bury. I didn't go to the meeting. I was conveniently in back-to-back training that afternoon. And when Brian asked about it later, I just told him I was waiting on legal's input before adjusting the model. He waved it off, said, yeah, don't worry about them. I've got it handled. Handled. God, if only he knew how many careers I've seen crater under those words. That's when the suspicion turned strategic. When I started labeling every file I touched. When I pulled my compliance binder from the office and kept a mirrored backup at home. When I stopped talking to anyone in HR without typing out a summary after the call. When I started watching Brian like a hawk watches a drunk rabbit on an icy road. Because I knew where this was going, I just didn't know how fast. The HR rep had the kind of smile you only ever see on TV weather anchors and used car salesmen. Polished, practiced, and completely divorced from the reality behind it. Her name was Vanessa, and she wore pastel blazers like armor. When I stepped into her office that Tuesday morning, she was already mid-sip of a La Croix and pretending not to be surprised to see me. Oh, Rachel, she chirped, setting down the can like she hadn't just been doom-scrolling LinkedIn. What can I do for you? I closed the door behind me and took the seat across from her without asking. No coffee, no folder, no preamble. I'd like to formally request a performance-based salary review. There it was. Simple, professional. 10 years in finance, and I still knew how to say you screwed me in 4 polite words. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it brightened, like she was thrilled to be denying me. Well, as you probably heard, she said, crossing her legs in a way that telegraphed condescension more than comfort. There's a company-wide freeze in effect. No raises, no exceptions, not even for our MVPs. She even winked when she said that, like we were teammates in a rigged game. Right, I said. That was communicated. But my review was already scheduled. And my cost savings report was submitted last quarter. I'm not requesting a raise, I'm requesting a review. There's a distinction. She laughed, a tight nasal thing that didn't reach her eyes. Rachel, you know how these things work. The moment the freeze was announced, all comp-related processes were paused. Hands are tied. I tilted my head slightly. Tied by whom? Her brows twitched barely, but I caught it. I continued calmly, was legal consulted before the freeze. Considering the compensation structures linked to signed performance goals and our obligations under the equitable recognition framework, it's just the language in the HR handbook's pretty clear. She blinked twice. The first blink was instinct. The second was fear pretending to be patience. I'd have to double-check that, she said smoothly, opening a drawer and pretending to search for something. But I assure you, all appropriate departments were informed. Informed isn't the same as consulted, I said gently, watching her fingers fumble around a drawer that held nothing but paperclips and a stress ball shaped like a globe. And just like that, the mask cracked. Not completely, Vanessa was good, but enough. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? She asked, standing a beat too fast. A dismissal masked as accommodation. I stood as well, smiled. No, this was helpful. That afternoon, I went back to my desk and opened the arbitration schedule. It had been floating around internally, an ops versus finance conflict over budget reallocation. Nothing new. Every quarter there's a tangle over who gets what piece of the pie. I wasn't supposed to be involved. I wasn't on either side. But I knew the projections in question came from Brian's adjusted version of the leaseback report. And yet, when I opened the PDF, skimmed the witness list, and reached the supplemental testimony section, my name wasn't there. Not even in passing. Ops had flagged the budget inconsistencies. Legal had agreed to arbitration. But somehow, the person who built the original projection model, the one Brian had edited into a fantasy, had been neatly erased from the narrative. And I knew why. Because if I wasn't on record, then Brian could say the numbers were a team effort. He could claim collaborative oversight, could wash his hands clean in front of a neutral third party and let the company eat the fine if it came to that. That's when I stopped waiting for fairness. HR wasn't a buffer. They were Brian's second skin. Legal wasn't a safeguard. They were risk accountants with nicer suits. And the people who were supposed to care, they were already placing bets on who'd take the fall if this thing blew up. So I made a choice. I opened my notes, created a new folder, Freeze Fallout. I added everything: timestamps, call summaries, screenshots of internal memos, a photo of the whiteboard from Brian's cost innovation brainstorm where someone had literally written creative accounting in dry erase. I tagged it all, chronologically, neatly, thoroughly, because if they were going to cut me out of the story, then I'd become the footnote that ruined the ending. No outbursts, no hallway confrontations, just evidence. And patience, because they'd think I was done. They'd think I'd folded. They'd think the silence meant surrender. But what they didn't know, what they never learned about women like me, is that silence, when wielded right, isn't retreat. It's a loaded gun with the safety off. The first time I knew Brian had officially started sharpening the knife was when my personnel file got flagged for an informal performance note. Not a warning, not a write-up, just a quiet little blemish with no notification, unless you had access to HRIS and friends with clearance. Luckily, I did. Nina from compliance pinged me at 6:12 p.m., right as I was microwaving leftover pad thai in the break room. She'd seen a system flag with my name on it, and because she once saw Brian yell at a receptionist for using the wrong branded notepad, she decided to give me a heads up. Just says concerning pattern of inflexibility around strategic cost alignment. Sound familiar? I didn't answer right away. I just stared into the microwave as the noodles rotated, limp and exhausted like the rest of us. Brian had made his move. The freeze wasn't the end game, it was the setup. Now he was laying the groundwork for the character assassination. I could practically hear the script writing itself. Rachel's been resistant to change. Rachel struggles with collaborative flexibility. Rachel doesn't see the big picture. Meanwhile, Brian, he'd come out of this looking like the martyred innovator, the guy trying to save the budget from the dead weight, the visionary held back by legacy thinkers, by women like me. 2 days later, confirmation came wrapped in styrofoam and passive aggression. I was having lunch in the back loading dock, yes, glamorous, when Julia from procurement dropped beside me on the bench, holding a taco salad and that look people wear when they don't want to be involved, but also don't want you to get screwed. Did you hear about the vendor pushback on Facility Solutions? She asked, poking at limp lettuce like it had wronged her. Facility Solutions, the third party Brian had roped into backing his revised leaseback model. They'd signed off on his fantasy numbers. But apparently, someone over there still had a working calculator. They sent back a red line, she said, caught an inconsistency between the savings model Brian submitted and the projected maintenance budget they'd received last quarter. Difference of like $287K. I blinked. Did they send it to legal? They CC'd ops and copied finance. Not you though. Weird, huh? Not weird. Intentional. Brian was building his wall, brick by brick. If anything crumbled, he wanted enough distance to say, well, I trusted Rachel's original numbers. If she missed something, that's on her. But the vendor smelled smoke and they weren't willing to burn alone. After Julia left, I didn't finish my lunch. I went back to my desk, locked the door to my shared office, and got to work. First, emails. Every single thread that had Brian's fingerprints on it, every draft I'd submitted, every change he requested, every time he just tweaked the language or updated for optics. I exported the threads, renamed them with timestamps, labeled them cleanly: Leaseback Original PDF, Leaseback Brian Edits 1, DocX, Leaseback Vendor Discrepancy Flagged MSG. Then I moved to my private compliance notes, the ones I kept separately from the company server. I didn't take anything proprietary, nothing confidential. Just my own work, my own comments, my own observations. The stuff no one ever bothers to preserve until it's already on fire. I created a new flash drive, labeled it Utilities, because no one questions something labeled Utilities in a finance department. Then I encrypted it. Call me paranoid, I call it experienced. Because I've watched too many women get erased in slow motion. Not fired, not humiliated, just gradually rewritten until they no longer exist. Their work becomes communal. Their mistakes become theirs alone. Their names show up only when legal needs a fall guy. Brian thought he was smart. He was positioning me as the obstacle, the stubborn analyst who couldn't adapt, the difficult personality who didn't play ball when asked to fudge the math for the greater good. And the note in my file, that was the first breadcrumb. But breadcrumbs go both ways, so I left my desk late that night. No dramatic exit. No angry slam of my laptop, just the steady rhythm of a woman who knew the clock was ticking and already had the receipts. Let Brian keep playing PR. Let him leak whispers in HR meetings and passive-aggressively loop me out of budget calls. Let him think the story was already written, because he'd forgotten one thing. I didn't need to win their trust back. I just needed to survive long enough for someone to read the fine print. The arbitration room looked like every corporate meeting room that's ever existed, overhead lighting designed to bleach your soul, walls painted in eggshell neutrality, and a long mahogany table that had probably witnessed more lies than actual decisions. The only thing that made this one different was the court reporter in the corner and the palpable fog of pretense that settled over everything like dust. I took my seat in the last row, no nameplate, no invitation. Just a silent presence with a visitor badge clipped to my blazer and a notepad I didn't intend to write in. Officially, I wasn't a participant. I wasn't on ops list. Finance had excluded me. And legal? They played dumb. We went with key contributors only, they said. As if the person who built the original budget model wasn't essential to a case about how that same model got manipulated into fantasy. Brian was already seated at the table when I walked in, flanked by his usual entourage, an HR liaison with a clipboard, a junior finance analyst who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, and our general counsel, Alina, who blinked like she was stuck in a screensaver. He didn't look at me, but he knew I was there. That smug bastard always knew when someone was watching. He fed on it. The panel opened with procedural niceties. Then the ops director, Jason, who once offered me a granola bar during a fire drill and acted like it was a marriage proposal, laid out their complaint. The updated leaseback savings, as filed, were materially inconsistent with prior reports and unsupported by actual vendor documentation. In plain English, someone cooked the numbers, and ops got blamed when the savings failed to show up. Brian's turn came, and oh, he was ready. He stood with the poise of someone who'd practiced his lines in the mirror that morning while adjusting his hair just enough to look frazzled but brilliant. His tone was calm, his gestures minimal, like he was allergic to drama but being forced into it by lesser minds. We recalibrated our cost projections in response to shifting vendor timelines, he said. All changes were made with transparency and sign-off from the appropriate teams. No objections were raised internally. That last part was aimed at me. He didn't name me, he didn't have to. I was the internal team. Then the CFO spoke. Hal, corporate fossil, the kind of man who treated meetings like sermons and compliance like a suggestion. He leaned forward, laced his fingers like he was about to perform a eulogy, and said, "To my knowledge, no one raised any formal concerns regarding compliance prior to the revised budget submission." And there it was. Formal concerns. No mention of emails. No mention of legal being BCC'd. No mention of a flagged clause that could torpedo the entire risk mitigation structure of the company's insurance rider. It was a subtle thing. But in finance, subtlety is how you kill people. I felt my stomach tighten, but my face didn't move. I sat perfectly still. No fidgeting, no eye rolls, just a quiet statue in the back of the room. And that was when I caught her watching me. Across the table, seated with the ops team, was a woman I didn't recognize. Late 30s. Sharp charcoal suit, eyes like a hawk with a law degree. Her laptop was open, but her attention was locked on me, not Brian, not Hal, me. She was the outside counsel ops had brought in. Neutral, technically. But every time Brian spoke, she glanced at me, like she was measuring the silence I wasn't breaking, like she could feel the heat under the ice. At lunch, I stepped outside for air. The company cafeteria was 2 floors down, but I had no appetite for overpriced paninis and forced small talk. I headed for the patio behind the south stairwell. Half concealed, rarely used, it smelled like sun-warmed cement and cigarette ghosts. She was already there. "Rachel, right?" she said, not a question. I nodded. "I'm Madison Parker, counsel for ops." We stood there for a moment, not talking, just sharing the silence. The breeze caught her jacket. I watched as she pulled a protein bar from her purse and offered it without looking. "I know you're not on the record." Yet, I didn't move. I didn't take the bar. "I don't have anything to offer," I said flatly. She smiled, small and knowing. "Not today, maybe." We both knew what was at stake. This wasn't just some departmental scuffle over accounting minutiae. The arbitration was a prelude to something bigger. Because if ops could prove that finance submitted knowingly inflated projections, it wasn't just an internal slap on the wrist. It was insurance fraud. A clause buried in our corporate fidelity insurance stated that any misrepresentation in financial disclosures, if not flagged and addressed internally, could void coverage for up to $3 million in damages. And Brian was trying to dance past that clause with a straight face and a backup choir of people pretending they hadn't seen the trap. But the clause existed, and I had emailed about it. Madison tossed the protein bar back in her purse. "When you're ready," she said, "I'll be around." Then she walked off, no drama, no pressure. Just a quiet offer left hanging in the air like the smell of rain before a storm. I leaned against the wall and exhaled. I hadn't broken the silence. Not yet, but they'd lit the match. And I was holding the kerosene. I didn't sleep the night after the arbitration hearing, not really. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked its tired rhythm, counting each slow revolution like a metronome for my thoughts. My apartment felt cold, sterile, like the air had turned against me too. The email kept replaying in my head. Not the words, I knew those by heart, but the exact moment I sent it. 8:47 a.m. The same morning Brian had announced the raise freeze. That timestamp was a loaded weapon. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was surgical. Precise. It proved I had flagged the insurance clause before Brian made a move, before the CFO testified, before legal's current timeline could pretend I was just another bitter employee watching her bonus evaporate. I pulled up the email again, sitting at my kitchen table with the screen's glow the only light in the room. There it was. Subject: Insurance Clause Review Urgent to Brian Carson CC, Alina Morris, General Counsel, BCC, Legal Compliance at Delmont.com sent, 8:47 a.m. Date: 2 weeks ago, the morning of the freeze. 4 short paragraphs. Professional. Tidy. Each sentence carefully built to communicate concern without sounding accusatory. Copy-paste of the relevant clause from the Fidelity rider. A simple statement of risk, that freezing or redistributing funds tied to performance-based evaluations without a formal clause review could trigger a breach in the insurance coverage. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't speculated. I'd simply put the truth in writing. Brian had replied, of course. Thanks, we'll review, he'd said, followed by a calendar invite that never acknowledged the content. Just another meeting buried in a week full of performative collaboration. I closed the email window and opened my compliance folder, updated the contents. I moved the email into a new subfolder, pre-freeze flagged risks, created another for vendor discrepancies. I renamed files, restructured the tree, ensured the naming conventions aligned with best internal audit practices. It would look accidental to someone untrained, just a tidy digital house. But to the right eyes, it would look like a landmine map. I encrypted the folder again, copied it to the utilities flash drive, made a separate encrypted backup, and emailed it to my personal cloud using a burner alias I'd created years ago during a different storm. Then I sat back in the kitchen chair and stared at the screen for a long time. It was nearly 4 a.m. when I stood up. Before shutting down, I did one last thing. I filed an internal ethics report, anonymous but not vague. I cited a failure to acknowledge internal risk communication prior to major fiscal changes. I attached a redacted version of the email, not the full version, not enough to blow the lid off, but enough to point them toward the truth. I referenced the insurance clause by number. I marked the timing. Then I clicked submit and watched the confirmation screen flicker for a moment before disappearing into the server void. By 10 a.m., the office was buzzing. Not with drama, not yet. Just the kind of low-level static you only hear when someone in legal has been cornered by a process they thought they could ignore. By noon, Madison Parker, Ops Outside Counsel, filed a formal subpoena for all internal communications tied to the leaseback savings model, the raise freeze, and any documentation referencing Clause 7 of the Fidelity rider. It was a tactical move. She didn't need a smoking gun. She just needed enough smoke to make people cough. And legal had no choice but to comply. By 2 p.m., Alina's assistant was digging through archives. People pretended to work while secretly watching who went in and out of her office. I passed her in the hallway and caught the flicker of something rare behind her eyes, panic. It looked good on her, matched her shoes. Brian, for his part, was unusually quiet. He hadn't pinged me all day. No sarcastic email threads, no check-ins on collaborative revisions, just radio silence. The kind that settles over a man who's been handed a riddle and suddenly realizes he's missing half the alphabet. And me, I stayed still. I didn't approach anyone. I didn't forward any new emails. I didn't respond to the whispers in the kitchen or the glances in the elevator. I just did my job, ran a variance report, reviewed a vendor ledger, scheduled a check-in with accounting about a contract renewal no one cared about. Because the trick to wielding a blade like this isn't in the swing. It's in making sure they never see the handle in your hand. It showed up in legal's discovery folder like a bone rising out of a shallow grave. Buried, but not deep enough. Marked flagged communication internal insurance inquiry. Alina claimed it had surfaced during a broader compliance sweep, which was corporate speak for we found this and were terrified. By Tuesday morning, I had a calendar invite. No subject line, no agenda, just my name, the arbitration room number, and the word supplemental. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. This was the part of the dance where everyone pretended we weren't circling the same drain. The part where HR stopped making eye contact and Brian started walking past my desk like I was contagious. At 9:53 a.m., I stood outside the arbitration room in a navy blue blazer I hadn't worn since the last board review. I held nothing in my hands. No folders, no notes. Everything I needed was already part of the record. Brian appeared from around the corner, coffee in hand, that same salesman gait like he'd just come from a client win instead of a slow, public undoing. He spotted me and offered a nod, thing halfway between casual and calculated. "Hey Ratch," he said, like we were just bumping into each other at the printer. I walked right past him. No smile, no scowl, just the clean silence of a woman who'd finally become immune. Inside, the room looked different this time. More eyes, the same panel, same counsel, but a new kind of tension. The kind you feel before a balloon pops. Madison sat straighter. Alina looked pale. Hal, the CFO, wasn't present. Not yet, I was sworn in quickly. The court reporter raised an eyebrow, probably wondering why someone like me, who wasn't even on the original list, was suddenly in the spotlight. "Miss Keating," said the judge, a tall, thin man who always spoke like he was half distracted by another thought, "can you confirm whether you authored this email sent at 8:47 a.m. on the morning of the raise freeze?" He slid a printout across the table. My email. The one with the subject line, Insurance Clause Review Urgent. I took my time reading it even though I didn't need to. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make the people squirm. Yes, I said finally. That's mine. You wrote it the morning of the freeze? Yes. And you sent it to Mr. Carson, copied General Counsel, and blind copied the compliance address? Yes. Did anyone respond substantively? No, he paused. Would you like to elaborate on the concerns raised in the email? I looked at Madison, then at Alina, then at Brian, whose smile had begun to droop like a cheap vinyl banner in the sun. No, I said. The room shifted just slightly. A chair creaked. Someone coughed. Very well, the judge said. The panel will review the contents of this document at the final session tomorrow. And that was it. No fireworks, no grand speeches, just a pin dropped on a timeline that could no longer be rewritten. I stepped down from the stand and walked back to the gallery. Brian didn't look at me again. Madison did. She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because now the email wasn't just a ghost in the system. It was exhibit material, a legal fact, a time-stamped wedge in the foundation of Brian's narrative. And me? I sat still. Back row. No fidgeting. Let them wonder what else I hadn't said. Let them fear what other folders might resurface. Because sometimes the most powerful testimony is knowing exactly when to shut the hell up. Hal stepped up to the witness table like he was stepping onto a golf green, confident, relaxed, just another day of benign executive theater. He straightened his cuffs, adjusted his reading glasses, and nodded toward the panel like he was doing them a favor by being there. Man carried himself with the self-assurance of someone who had never once in his career been the smartest person in the room, but had always been rich enough to outlast those who were. His voice, as always, was soft, polished, that soothing drone designed to sound credible, even when he was saying absolutely nothing. The freeze, he began, was implemented in response to emergent operational cost pressures and anticipated downturns in vendor obligations. It was a measured, appropriate response carried out with full transparency. Madison didn't even blink. She sat perfectly still, pen resting against her notebook, waiting. Hal continued. To my knowledge, he said, the corners of his mouth tightening slightly, no formal objections were raised regarding the financial redistribution, nor were any compliance flags triggered prior to execution. And there it was, the phrase again, to my knowledge. He wielded it like a lawyer in church, technically true, morally bankrupt, because Hal didn't deal in facts. Hal dealt in plausible deniability. Across the table, Madison finally moved. She leaned forward, flipped a page in her binder with surgical precision, and said, I'd like to revisit one document, if I may. She slid a folder across the table to the panel. Inside was the printout, Rachel Keating's email. Subject line, Insurance Clause Review Urgent. Timestamped 8:47 a.m. Morning of the freeze. The judge, who had spent most of Hal's testimony doodling legal notes on a yellow pad, stopped writing. He adjusted his glasses, took the folder, opened it. Silence spread across the room like a crack in glass. Alina shifted uncomfortably. Brian, in the gallery behind legal, stared at the floor. The judge read silently at first, eyes scanning, mouth slightly parted. Then he looked up. Counsel, are you asserting this document was not received by General Counsel? Alina sat forward. It appears to have been overlooked in the initial review process. It wasn't, that's not what I asked. She paused. It was received, yes. The judge turned to Hal. And you're still testifying under oath that no objections were raised prior to freeze execution? Hal cleared his throat. He looked at Alina, then at Madison, then back to the judge. I was not made aware of this specific communication at the time, he said slowly. So again, to my knowledge, your knowledge, the judge interrupted, is no longer sufficient. The words landed like a shot across a still lake. No one moved. The judge turned the document around and marked it with a red tab. This will be entered into the record as Exhibit 14. He underlined the timestamp with his pen, hard, deliberate strokes. 8:47 a.m., he said aloud. On the day of the freeze, he leaned back, specific, unambiguous, and addressed directly to the executive making the decision. Hal's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He gave a small nod, not of understanding, but of surrender, like someone who's just realized the brakes are out and the cliff is a lot closer than it looked 5 minutes ago. Madison didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The room had changed. You could feel it, like a weather front rolling in. What had been speculation was now evidence. What had been a clever cover story was now perjury-adjacent testimony. And what had been a simple staff email, it had just become a cornerstone of liability. The judge closed the folder. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize, review, and assess implications regarding the fidelity clause and any material breach. Then he stood, signaling the session was over. Hal rose, slower this time, his shoulders lower, the poise replaced by weight. As the room began to empty, Brian didn't move. He just stared at the table like he was trying to replay every move he'd made, every shrug, every omission, every calendar invite he sent instead of reading the goddamn email. And me? I walked out without a word, because the folder hadn't just reappeared. It had cracked the floor wide open. And the only thing louder than the silence in that room was the sound of consequences starting to breathe. The air in the arbitration room was different that morning. Heavier, No more scripted small talk or overcompensated cheerfulness. The panel sat quieter. The court reporter didn't even look up when we entered. No eye contact, no nods, just the calm before something sharp hits bone. Even the chairs felt harder. I took my usual place in the back, alone. No notebook, no laptop. Just a small black pen in my hand and that same old folder on the seat beside me. Not the physical one, I'd never needed to carry it, but the mental one, neatly indexed, time-stamped, and bulletproof. Madison was already seated, poised, and unreadable. Alina had ditched the pearls today, a small detail but telling. Even she could feel the weight of what was coming. Brian wasn't in the room. Cowardice has a way of hiding behind meeting conflicts. Hal, though. Hal was front and center, looking like he'd aged a year overnight. The tan had drained from his face, and for the first time since this began, his hands weren't folded neatly, they were clenched on the table in front of him. The judge cleared his throat and opened a folder, the red tab still peeking out like a warning flare. For the record, he began, we will now read into evidence Exhibit 14, previously submitted in yesterday's session. The court reporter's fingers hovered. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked at the room once, and began to read. 2. Brian Carson CC, Alina Morris BCC, Legal Compliance at Delmont.com subject. Insurance Clause Review Urgent sent, 8:47 a.m., March 8th. The pause. A glance at Hal. Then, in a flat, deliberate tone that cut through the room like a buzzsaw, to proceed with the freeze without clause review may breach Article 7 of the Fidelity Rider. Our insurer requires formal compliance review for any budgetary action impacting performance-linked compensation. Failure to do so could jeopardize our standing in the event of a claim. He stopped reading, closed the folder slowly, set it down, and then he looked up. Hal didn't speak, he didn't twitch, he just sank. It was subtle, like a building settling after years of pressure, but you could see it. Kind of slump that only happens when a man finally sees the pit he dug and realizes he was standing in it all along. The judge folded his hands. This changes the burden of liability, he said calmly. The record clearly shows that compliance risk was raised, documented, and received prior to action. Alina stiffened but didn't protest. Madison's lips curved, not a smile, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew the axe had finally hit wood. We'll be recommending immediate review by the External Compliance Oversight Board, the judge continued, and a hold on any further compensation adjustments until this matter is resolved. He turned to Hal. In the meantime, you may wish to retain independent counsel. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just raw stillness like the building itself was holding its breath. I didn't gloat. I didn't move. When the session adjourned, I stood quietly, gathered my pen, and walked out without a word. No one followed. No one called my name. They didn't need to. My presence had already done the damage. Outside, the sunlight hit hard, too bright, too clean. The kind of light that shows every flaw, every crack. I stood on the courthouse steps, the breeze catching the edge of my blazer, and pulled out my phone. There was one message I needed to send. I typed it slowly, thumb steady. You were right. A clean folder is the sharpest knife. I hit send. Then I put the phone in my pocket and walked away, not triumphant, not angry, just clear. They'd tried to rewrite the story. I just made sure the ending was mine. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.